Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. Today, this episode is for all of the dance teachers out there. So if you are not a teacher and you're tuning in, you are absolutely, of course, welcome to continue to listen to the episode. And I think you'll still get value from it. You can always kind of listen around the edges and figure out how it's applicable to you as well if you are a dancer or a dance parent. But I will ask, if you are not a dance teacher and you have a dance teacher in your life who you think might benefit from today's episode, I would love it if you would share today's episode with them because, like I said, it really is aimed at dance teachers. So today we're going to get into a little bit about self-care or taking care of our bodies as dance teachers. And this episode came about a couple of months ago. I can't even remember when. I put a little notice out on some of the Facebook teacher groups, like just the Facebook teacher community, and said, if there's any podcast topics you're really interested in, especially over the summer months, because I know teachers have more time to listen to podcasts and things like that. I kind of said, let me know what you're interested in, and I will try and develop content around that. And everywhere that I posted in a couple of different Facebook groups, a lot of teachers were requesting the same thing in terms of how do we take care of our own bodies? How do we deal with our own injuries? And honestly, I'm not that surprised that it was a topic that was requested multiple times from teachers because I do think this is something that a lot of teachers struggle with, and a lot of teachers are maybe not as proactive at taking care of their own health as they are about maybe taking care of their dancers' health. And we see this a lot in helping professions. I think you always kind of hear people jokingly talk about how, healthcare providers like nurses and doctors and even physios are actually the worst patients. They will wait until things are sort of in dire straits before addressing something or going and getting help. And even just in society, helping people in general. So we always hear about parents and especially mothers who are always putting their own needs and their own wellness on the back burner in order to prioritize their kids or their family or what have you. And I think dance teachers are no different. They're so used to being the one who's taking care of and taking charge of all of the dancers around them that they often kind of ignore and put their own needs on the back burner. And so hopefully today's episode will give you a little bit of motivation to prioritize your own health and well-being and some tools to be able to do that. So we're going to go through 5 things that I think can be helpful for dance teachers in terms of being able to prioritize their own health and really kind of take some time for self-care for their own bodies. So without further ado, I will dive into those 5 things. So first of all, and this is probably the biggest one I see with dance teachers, is we want to take care of or deal with old injuries and pre-existing injuries. And I actually see a decent amount of dance teachers in the clinic who are coming in, and the number of times that they are like, oh yeah, I had this, whatever the injury is, I tore my hamstring 30 years ago, or I sprained my ankle, or I broke my foot, or whatever it is. And oftentimes it's an injury that was not dealt with at that time. And there's probably multiple reasons for that. A lot of these injuries stem back to teachers in their dancing days. So they're not even injuries that they sustained as a teacher necessarily. They're often injuries that they sustained either while they were growing up dancing or oftentimes during their professional career. And a lot of these dance teachers nowadays who are coming into the clinic were dancing professionally 10, 20, 30, maybe even more years ago. And back then, healthcare, and especially healthcare for dancers and for performing artists, was fairly non-existent. So it is unsurprising that most dance teachers have injuries from when they were growing up that were not properly dealt with at the time. Maybe they were not dealt with at all and they were just completely ignored and they danced through the injury and what have you. Or if they did seek out treatment, it might not have been dance specific or performing arts specific healthcare. So it might not have been the most comprehensive treatment that they could have undergone if it was an injury that was occurring today, if that makes sense. So this is the biggest thing that we see is when teachers come in to the clinic and are dealing with injuries, oftentimes these injuries are rooted in previous injuries that they've had. And so they've been continuing to sometimes dance and often still teach and move and be active and all of that. And their body has learned to compensate and adapt to whatever limitations they might have had from that injury that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. So the number one thing that I would encourage dance teachers to do is if you have old injuries that you did not sort of get dealt with at the time, and you think that it's impacting things nowadays. And oftentimes people will come in and be like, oh yeah, I had this hip injury like way back when, and now every morning when I wake up, my hip's achy, but then, I kind of move around and get going, and eventually it like loosens up, and, then I can get through my day. Or stories like this are quite common. But what that's telling me is there's something going on in the body still that has not been fully dealt with. And although it potentially, quote unquote, loosens up and you can get on with your day, it is still impacting your function throughout that day. So there is likely other parts of your body that are then compensating for whatever it is that's going on in that hip in this example. So it's really important that we try and address these long-standing issues as a way of really being proactive about taking care of our body going forwards, because these issues are just going to compound over time and become more and more serious or more and more significant in terms of how they impact our function. So really trying to deal with those. And like I said, healthcare, especially in the dance world, is so much further ahead now than it was 25 years ago, that even if it was something that sort of maybe kind of got looked at way back when, you probably have better options now in terms of like dealing with it and being able to access practitioners who maybe understand dancers' bodies and things like that. So number one, I would encourage you to deal with pre-existing injuries or injuries that have potentially not fully resolved from long ago. Number two is knowing your own physical limitations. And so this kind of ties into number one, maybe. So if you've had previous injuries and you know that there's something going on, but oftentimes this actually applies to teachers who maybe don't have any injuries or any issues going on, but need to recognize that they might not be 20 years old anymore. And so if you're demonstrating for your dancers, maybe your leg is not going up past your head anymore and things like that. And so I think a lot of teachers struggle with feeling like potentially they're going to lose respect from their dancers if they're not able to fully demonstrate and dance at the level they could once dance at. And I don't think that's true at all in the dance world. If I think back to some of my best dance teachers I had growing up, a lot of them barely danced or demonstrated at all. A lot of them were master teachers, but they had evolved their teaching practice over years and were using almost entirely verbal cues and using different teaching methods other than just being able to demonstrate. And so I think for a lot of teachers, that transition as you age and as you potentially are maybe not going to be able to demonstrate things at the same level you once could, it takes a little bit of self-awareness to know when it's okay to be pushing yourself a little bit, because we don't want to lose capacity. We want to sort of maintain fitness and stay strong and stay healthy and all of that, but also recognizing that you're not a 20-year-old professional dancer anymore. And so maybe it is okay to not do every single class every single day full out with your dancers, or maybe not demonstrating legs as high as they used to be, or back bends as deep as they used to be, or whatever it is. And like I said, I actually think that some of the best teachers are teachers who've had to develop other teaching skills. And I know for myself, it's not quite the same thing, but a little bit of a parallel. During COVID, we had to switch our practice to completely telehealth. And prior to that, I had done a little bit of telehealth because I treat people from out of town because not everybody can access a dance physio in their own community. But my practice turned 100% telehealth for a period of time. And because I could not put my hands on people and it was harder for me to physically demonstrate something, although sometimes I would demonstrate a movement, because I was not physically touching any of my patients, I had to get so much better with my verbal instructions and verbal cueing. And I actually think it really, really, really helped my practice in the long run, because previously I think I had relied a lot on just being able to, for lack of a better word, kind of manhandle people into position, or really like tactilely give people cues and feedback. But the reality is that if I have patients who are doing exercises on their own, or like they're like, following a rehab program, they don't have me there most of the time to give them that kind of tactile feedback. So being able to come up with ways of like verbally cueing them has been really, really impactful to my practice, not only when I'm doing telehealth appointments, but also with my clients that I am seeing face to face. And I think the same can be true for dance teachers, that oftentimes at the beginning of teachers' careers, and especially if you're younger and transitioning out of your own dance career and then into a teaching career, I think younger teachers often rely a lot on just being able to physically demonstrate. And so, they might be at the front of the class and the dancers are just following along and copying them. But I think that as you gain more experience in teaching, really being able to translate your teaching skills into using other teaching methods, and whether that be more verbal cueing or more imaging and imagery and things like that, is really impactful. And then also has the benefit of being able to protect your body a little bit. And so knowing your limitations of what you can and cannot demonstrate. The other thing that kind of comes into play with this a little bit, although this isn't a separate point, I didn't put this on my list and I maybe should have, but if you are demonstrating, making sure that you're not just like always demonstrating on one side. And we see this a lot too. Teachers will like always demonstrate just on one leg because they're like, well, that's my good side, so I want to show the dancers that side. And they don't then necessarily do the opposite side. So we see a lot of imbalances that show up with teachers. And so again, I think we just need to recognize that we don't always have to be demonstrating things at 100% in order for dancers to be able to get value from your teaching skill and from your teaching experience. So number 2 on the list is knowing your own physical limitations and when it's fine to be demonstrating and when maybe your body just needs a bit of a break and you're going to use different teaching methods or prioritize different teaching methods. Number 3 actually links a little bit into number 1 as well, but making sure that you have your own team of, I'm going to call them helpers, but oftentimes they're going to be healthcare providers. And this is going to look different for everyone. And some people might have, chiro on their team. It might be massage therapy. It might be physio. It might be like a mental therapist for mental health reasons, things like that. Everybody's going to figure out what their team is. And I would say develop your team and utilize your team. And so prevention is often easier than treatment. And so if you can kind of have a group of people around you and figure out what works for your body and for your health and wellness. And it's different for everyone. So I have clients who, I see them once a month as like sort of a maintenance or preventative type thing. And I have other clients who I see once every 3 months for like similar reasons. So it's not always going to be the same frequency, and it might be different for different practitioners. You might, go see massage therapist once a month, but maybe you see physio once every 3 months just to check in on different strength and mobility and things like that. So finding your team and then utilizing your team before things go into like kind of crisis status, basically. So really trying to look at things from a more preventative lens is huge for teachers. And again, this is an area where I think teachers really struggle because you're constantly like, I don't have time for X, Y, Z. And so it's not until something kind of breaks down or you're having pain or you're limited in what you can functionally do that then you're like forced into prioritizing that and going to these appointments. But if you can prioritize them beforehand and make them more of a regular habit, we can often avoid these more kind of crisis type situations. And this is something that a lot of teachers are now really aware of in terms of advocating for their dancers to develop their team around them and know who their team, or one of the analogies that's often used is like their pit crew. And so one of
my colleagues within the dance medicine world always refers to like a dancer's team as their pit crew. And so it's like going for your pit stop, like if you're kind of comparing it to car racing or that type of thing. So having that team of people, teachers are really good at advocating for that for their dancers, but don't necessarily utilize those same resources for themselves. So have your pit crew and make sure you have regular pit stops. And again, it's going to look different for everyone how frequently you need to be doing those things. And like I said, it might be different for different practitioners or for different kind of modalities. Some of the things that can even fall into that category are even things like your own exercise routines. And so maybe it's going to the gym, or maybe it's doing Pilates, or maybe it's swimming or things like that, and having those regularly in your schedule. And then maybe on top of that, you also go for massage once a month or whatever. So everyone's body is different, but really figuring out what works for your body so that you can be performing and like doing your job at an optimal level, because we know dance teachers' jobs are physical. You're not sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day or whatever. You're on your feet, you're moving around. There's a lot of physical demand that comes with it. So we want to make sure that we're being proactive and taking care of that. So number 3, have your team. Number 4, I'm going to say pay attention. I don't really know how to word this properly, but pay attention to foot and ankle and footwear and all of that sort of stuff. So we know in dance in general, so not teachers necessarily, but dancers in general, foot and ankle injuries account for about 50% or just more than 50% of injuries in dancers. And in dance teachers, this certainly holds true, and I would argue is maybe even a higher proportion of injuries. So the vast majority of teachers who we see in the clinic coming in are dealing with some sort of kind of foot and ankle discomfort, and whether it's kind of like a plantar fasciitis or, arthritic type pains, bunions, whatever it is, we know that we're dealing with a lot of foot and ankle stuff with dance teachers. And there's multiple reasons for that, but part of it is, like I just said, you're not sitting at a desk. It is a job where you're on your feet all day, every day. Potentially it's a job where you are not necessarily wearing great footwear. Maybe your feet are squeezed into too tight tap shoes or whatever it is. So if we can really pay attention to foot and ankle health, we really eliminate and take care of a lot of other issues that are happening in the body as well. So our feet are like number one way that we interact with our environment a lot of the time. They're like our interface between the floor and the rest of our body. And if our feet aren't able to function really well, then those forces that are coming up from the floor and all of these types of things are being transmitted to other parts of our body. So if our feet aren't able to absorb, shock or absorb force really well, then maybe that's going up to the knees, or maybe that's going up to the hip, or maybe it's going up to the low back, and other issues can arise from there. So really taking care of our foot health makes a huge difference for our overall health as dance teachers. So there's a few things to consider within that category. One of the things is the flooring surface that you're on. And so I know a lot of you teachers don't have a lot of control over this, but if you're a studio owner, you probably do have some control or more control over this. And ideally, like in a perfect world, every single dancer would be dancing on a sprung floor, and therefore every teacher would be teaching on a sprung floor. But the reality is not every floor is sprung. But if you know that you're teaching in a studio and the floors are not sprung, maybe you can start to advocate for, can we, change the flooring in this studio? I know when I was a kid, and we were maybe slightly ahead of the time, because this would have been in the, I'm going to say mid to late 90s probably, our studio did a massive fundraising campaign. It was led by the parents, and the parents did a huge fundraising campaign to put a new proper sprung floor in the studio that we were in. It was a church that had been converted into a dance studio. So the original floor was this wooden church floor where all the floorboards were not even even. There was divots in it and stuff. It was not ideal. And so the parents did a really big fundraising campaign and actually raised enough money to put in a proper sprung dance floor, which at the the time was like a fairly state-of-the-art floor. So, if you are a teacher and you're in a studio that doesn't have a sprung floor, maybe it's a conversation that gets raised with the studio owner or the building owner or whatever, and maybe there's a way of improving the flooring surface, not just for teachers' health, but also for our dancers' health, because we want them on sprung floors as much as possible as well. If you aren't immediately on sprung floors in the studio, then we need to pay more attention to what your footwear is going to be. And so again, I think teachers often feel like they need to be in dance shoes while they're teaching. And for certain genres of dance, like absolutely that makes sense. Like if you're a tap teacher, chances are you're probably going to need to be in tap shoes, at least for part of a class. But if you are teaching other genres of dance or you're teaching for really long hours, you might need to switch out your footwear throughout your teaching day. And so maybe you're teaching, I don't know, let's say an acro class, and you're spotting a lot of people throughout the class and you're not necessarily demonstrating a whole lot. Maybe you're actually going to have like athletic shoes or runners or something on for that class. And then maybe you're teaching a tap class afterwards. So you put your tap shoes on for one class. So I think teachers need to be aware of what's on their feet and switching out shoes and potentially having more supportive shoes if you're on a floor that has less support to it. That being said, our feet don't always function at their best when we cram them into shoes at all times. So we want feet to be able to be feet. And in order for feet to function at their optimal, we need to be able to like splay our toes and have our feet be kind of like mobile and malleable along like against the floor. And they need to be able to interact with their environmental kind of surfaces. So just shoving our feet into shoes all day, every day is not the solution at all. We also need to pay attention to allowing our feet time to be in either shoes that are a more natural footwear, so like a wider toe box, a barefoot style shoe, or just simply be in like bare feet for part of the day. So mixing things up and just being aware of what your feet are doing throughout the day. And then also making sure that we're kind of optimizing the function of our feet. So like I said, feet can't act as feet, or they don't function optimally if they're shoved in shoes all day. So making sure that we're having time without shoes on where we can really work on the intrinsic functions of our foot. So working on intrinsic muscle control of our feet, working on mobility of our feet, things like rolling out our feet regularly so that we're really maintaining the function of the foot as best we can. And then knowing that, sometimes we actually just do need a little bit of external support. So that's when we're going to put on our supportive shoes. Or another option too is supportive socks as well. So a lot of teachers, I think recently, have started using compression socks while they're teaching if they're going to be on their feet all day. And this can be a really, really fantastic option just to give you a little bit of extra cushioning, a little bit of extra support. Again, especially if you're on a floor that is not an ideal flooring surface, that doesn't have a lot of give to it, that's quite a hard floor. Compression socks can be really helpful. So one of the brands that was designed specifically for dancers is the Opstal socks, and I've probably talked about them before on the podcast. So that's a brand that's really popular among dance teachers, but I know other brands, dance brands, I think Block actually has like a compression sock as well now, and you can also just get compression socks that aren't dance specific either, that are just general ones. So that's something to consider, either to be in just a compression sock with no shoe at all if you're teaching, say, a contemporary class and you're wanting to demonstrate things in socks. Maybe you are wearing a compression sock for slightly more support, or to have alongside whatever footwear it is you're actually wearing. So those are just a few things to think about when it comes to foot care, but really prioritizing foot care makes a massive difference to, like I said, the rest of our body and how the rest of our body functions. So if our feet are functioning optimally and they're working as really good shock absorbers and they're able to interact really well with our environment, it's going to dissipate some of those forces and loads that are going up into the rest of our body, and will oftentimes help address, hip pain or back pain or things like that have been going on. So I would encourage teachers to really prioritize their feet. And this is something you could incorporate into your classes, depending on who your dancers are. Maybe you're like, I do not have extra time in my day to focus on like doing the foot exercises and foot care and that sort of thing. Great. Take 20 minutes from one of your classes and do it with your dancers. They will absolutely benefit from this stuff as well. So you could incorporate it into your class and then participate along with your dancers. So that is where are we on our list. Number 4 is really prioritizing foot care and considering how our feet are interacting with our environment. And then finally, in terms of prioritizing teacher health and wellness, is thinking about nervous system regulation. And this is kind of a large topic and could probably be, and it is an entire podcast topic or episode topic all on its own. But I just want to highlight it a little bit in this episode because I think it's a really important thing for teachers to consider. Dance teaching and teachers' jobs are often quite stressful. And that can be from, stresses that you cannot control, things like maybe parents are coming at you with questions, or maybe there's been issues happening like kind of external to your actual direct teaching practice. You hear about things all the time recently. There was just like theaters that started canceling studios bookings. I know we had an issue locally where one of the theaters was like shut down on the day that a studio was supposed to be having their year-end recital. And so there's all these stressors that teachers are constantly having to deal with, as well as your job, you're always having to be sort of on. It's not a job where, again, you're sitting at a desk and you're doing work throughout the day, but if you just need like a 10-minute like mental break to shut down and to, take a moment for yourself, you can't really do that as a dance teacher unless you have time between classes. But when you're in a studio and when you are with dancers, and especially smaller dancers where there's a lot of classroom management going on and things like that, you have to be on 100% of the time. And this often can lead to our nervous systems feeling a little bit frazzled. So I think a lot of people are familiar, at least partially familiar, with the idea of the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is kind of our fight or flight nervous system. And so it's the part of our nervous system that kind of gets us ramped up, gets us revved up. It's like survival back from, caveman days would be like we would either, fight off whatever was threatening our livelihood or our life, or we would like flee, basically. So fight or flight, or oftentimes people will throw freeze into that as well. So fight, flight, freeze. Parasympathetic nervous system is kind of the opposite. It's the part of our nervous system that creates more calm, creates more relaxation. We often call it the like rest and digest type of regulation within the nervous system. And just in general, society, we tend to often be a little bit more towards the sympathetic part of our nervous system. The way society is nowadays, with everybody being like on 24/7, connected via social media. We have like our email in our pockets, on our phones and all of that. And just the amount of stimulation that goes on in the world. Generally, we tend to be maybe more towards that sympathetic state. And then as dance teachers, I think we live even more towards that sympathetic state of just, like I said, constantly having to be on when you're in the classroom. And if you're dealing with a noisy classroom of like younger kids, or kids are like crying or things like that, that can like feed into that as well. So we really need to prioritize being able to regulate our own nervous system. There's a concept of like co-regulation where we're in. And so this happens with like parents and children, but it happens with like teachers and students and things like that as well, is when we are in community with other people, our nervous systems feed off of their nervous systems. So if we have somebody who is more regulated and is more in a parasympathetic nervous system state, or they're not in that sort of fight or flight state, they are more likely to be able to co-regulate with other people around them. And this is really important from a teaching perspective, because if we want our students to be in a kind of calm and receptive state so that they are ready to dance and they're ready to take on information and their bodies are ready to participate in what it is we're teaching them, they need to be able to be in that more sort of parasympathetic state. And if we as a teacher are in that sort of like fight or flight state all the time, that co-regulation isn't going to necessarily happen. And it's going to be a lot harder to promote that within our students. So again, there's a lot of awareness around this, where like just even checking in with yourself and kind of feeling like trying to notice what state your nervous system is potentially in, or if there are certain triggers that you know that you're like, oh, there's this thing that happens, and every time it happens, I can feel my nervous system start to ramp up, or I can feel my heart rate start to increase, or I can feel myself get really stressed out by this one thing, then maybe that's something we can work on kind of addressing to really promote nervous system regulation. There are so many things that can help promote nervous system regulation, and it's going to be different for everyone. Some people, like the things that move the dial the most for some people are different than for other people, but common examples of stuff that people will use will be things like breathing techniques, meditation, time spent in nature, like going for a walk in the forest or sitting by like the ocean or a lake or like a big body of water. There's actually a lot of research to support being close to large bodies of water. Journaling, I think I said meditation already, but things like that all can have an effect on how our nervous system regulates itself. And like I said, the dial movers are going to be different for different people. And so some people might have like a more calming effect or respond better to being out in nature, and other people might respond better to like breathing techniques or things like that. One of the other things that I think is really powerful for nervous system regulation too is participating in activities that light you up. And so again, it's going to be different for every single person, but I think dance teachers often, because they're really, really busy, don't always prioritize time for things outside of the dance world. But maybe you love painting, or maybe you love running, or maybe you love sailing, or whatever it is that is the thing that you're like really, really passionate about, or the thing that you really enjoy. And really trying to incorporate that into your life can have a really big effect on your nervous system as well. So I think sometimes if people are feeling a little bit like stressed or burnt out, or like, okay, like, you know, I need a break or I need some like regulation, there's often this idea that it all has to be like slow down, like take a rest, have a nap, like go meditate. And there's all like this like kind of really taking time to pause, and that can absolutely be really powerful for some people. But for some people, that's not necessarily what they need. They need to keep doing, but they need to be doing something that really, really lights them up. So again, it's going to be different for every single person, but really diving into knowing yourself and knowing the things that can help to regulate your nervous system make a massive, massive difference in terms of your ability, for your body to deal with all of the stressors that are being thrown at it on a daily basis. But then, like I said, also your ability to teach in the classroom and the effect that that is going to have on your students and their nervous system. So like I said, huge, huge topic. This is something we dive into quite a bit in the Flexibility Foundations course. So that's my flexibility course that's really like rooted in the nervous system and harnessing the power of the nervous system to improve mobility and flexibility in our dancers. And this is one of the things that we touch on, is some of this nervous system regulation stuff and how we can help our dancers regulate their nervous systems, but how this is also comes from teachers, and teachers coming from a place of a regulated nervous system as well. So I'm not going to, drone on about it anymore in this episode, but if it is something that you're interested in, like I said, there's tons of information about it out there. And it is something we dive into quite a bit in the Flexibility Foundations course. So there's going to be another round of that starting up in September. So if you're interested, there is information about that on the website. You can join the waitlist, so you'll be the first people to get all of that information. And then registration will be opening in a few weeks' time. So keep your eye out on social media and stuff if you're interested in that as well. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. I will do a quick little recap of our 5 things that I think are really important for dance teachers in terms of taking care of their own bodies. So, number 1, dealing with pre-existing injuries or past injuries, because I promise you they're still affecting your body if they weren't dealt with at the time. Number 2, knowing your own physical limitations and being okay with the fact that maybe you're not going to be physically demonstrating every single thing in a class anymore. Number 3, develop your team or have your pit crew of people that you know that you're going to check in regularly with to do kind of preventative maintenance on your body. Number 4, prioritize foot care and foot health and really consider footwear and flooring surfaces and things like that because it has a massive impact on your overall body and your overall health. And then number 5, nervous system regulation and really prioritizing making time for yourself and making sure that you're not constantly living in that sympathetic fight or flight state. All right, I'm going to wrap things up there. I hope that you found that useful. Like I said, if you are not a teacher, but you listened along, thank you so much. And please, please share this episode with any teachers who you think could really benefit from this information. Like I said, I think teachers don't always prioritize their own health and well-being. And if we can start to change that narrative a little bit and really have teachers who are taking care of themselves and their own body, we are going to have teachers who can teach longer, have longer careers, are going to burn out less, and that's just going to have an overall positive impact on the dance industry. So I hope you found that episode useful. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your support, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.